Hey y'all, this is sorry I'm not gonna be here today, so I thought I'd make a recording. Um, anyway, yeah, welcome. As I said before, we're gonna start period 6, which is just after the Civil War. Um, and there are like major themes that are going on in this theme. One of them is like just the rise of corporation. We're gonna be talking about this over and over and over again. We're gonna start right off with this unit as well. So one of the major things that happens in the Gilded Age is industrialization, corporations, and the rise of the American economy. Second is society and culture. There is a rapid urbanization, there's immigration, there are racial tensions following the Civil War, um, and that is the other part of the themes of this unit. And the second is kind of like questions that are either like justifying inequalities, um, how are we going to deal with these like changing cultures? So social Darwinism and other things are kind of the last part of it. So this time period is often known as the Gilded Age with an I, and gilded, if you have a chance to think about it, means like covered in gold. So, if you gild something, it is just like overlaid with gold or like, gold leaf. But if you scratch the surface, it is kind of overlying poverty, racism, corruption, and financial instability. So, Mark Twain came up with this as a name for the Gilded Age, and it just sort of stuck. So, today's lecture is on 6.2, the West and the economy. I'm just going to kind of run over some of the main points from the reading. So, following the Civil War, we are rapidly expanding west. Before the Civil War, we have this concept called manifest destiny, which is like this idea that, you have, like, it is your divine, like, goal to move west. So before the Civil War, we are moving west. Um, the other thing that is going to allow this is like the conflict with indigenous folks. We're going to focus on that more with the next lecture. But along with Manifest Destiny is the idea that this is a place for more of like the Anglo Americans, as a definition of the American, that it is just, it is good for us to move west and we should like push out everything else. Um, so this is like a kind of a continuation from previous time periods. The other thing that is really um, kind of pushing forward Western expansion is this like government incentives. And I really want you guys to focus on this word incentives. Incentives are like things that the government is going to do to help make something happen. It's not just capitalism and profit. The government is, giving something to corporations to help this happen. And what they start to do is during the time of the Civil War, there is not a lot of money, but we have a lot of land. Lincoln wanted to build a transcontinental railroad, and he is actively coordinating with the government and private corporations how to like give handouts to get things to happen. The other thing they're going to do is incentives to individuals or like subsidies, land grants to individuals, with the Homestead Act. And so they are actively trying to promote Western expansion, and the government is giving incentives and subsidies or bonds or loans. And the railroad is going to, be one of these major parts of the getting a lot of these grants. And the other thing is just like the technological changes, the transportation changes. As we build the transcontinental railroad, more people are going to move west, and you're going to have things like the harvester and all these other things. So, like, it is just enabling it to happen. So the first thing you really need to know, if I was to remember one thing about this entire thing, is the Pacific Railway Act. It is a number one. Um, and as I said before, we are going to hand land the size of Texas over to private corporations. It is 174 million acres of land. The government gives land as incentive or subsidies to private corporations in order to build this railroads. There are also bonds from the government as well. So it is just like, the government handing out money, handing out land to private corporations and be like, build it. The one good part about this system is it is quickly built. It is no money on the taxpayer, but it is not coordinated. So these corporations are starting from like two ends of the government. They are competing corporations. They are trying to grab up as much land as they can. They are not coordinating. It is not the most efficient way, but they are going to be using cheap immigrant labor and exploitative practices with Chinese labor, and Irish and Italian immigrants. And these corporations are going to be what builds the railroad. Where you need to be careful is this is not, I repeat, not government owned. It is not government run. It is just the government giving subsidies or incentives, mostly of land, to private corporations in order to be like, go build it. All right. Um, so these are the things that are going to create the railroads. And once we get that railroad, everything is going to be different. So by, these are all the land grants that we're going to give to railroads. And again, this is the biggest incentive that we have because the government doesn't have a ton of money at this point. The impact is striking. Um, you know, the railroads are going to like interconnect the economy, and this is what's called like an integrated market. It's going to standardize things. We're going to have more Western migration because it is easier to get out there. You're going to have national unionization. Over time, it is going to become more regulated, but the railroads themselves are chaos to begin with because they're not coordinating, they're not organized. Over time, it'll sort of settle out. But the biggest thing you need to remember about the railroads is this integrated market, right? This is going to make the materials come from all over the United States. The opposite of an integrated market is more like a localized market or self sufficiency. Like if I'm in New Orleans, I'm going to get my beef from a local butcher, right? And that cow probably came from a farm in Louisiana, right? And so what happens when you get the railroads is you have integrated means like everyone is buying like the same things from the same corporations. We are able to move resources back and forth. And people in New Orleans are going to buy beef from the same place that people in New York are going to buy. We are kind of like getting rid of a lot of these like skilled things like local butchers and having more monopolization. It's also going to have a huge environmental impact as we are able to go out and mine and exploit the resources in the West. But like I think the biggest thing, like the examples of these integrated markets, are these national brands. I am going to buy my crackers from, not from a local bakery, but from the National Biscuit Company, Nabisco, right? I'm going to buy ketchup from Heinz. And this integrated market is like everyone is buying the same thing. It's more homogenized. It is more like, you know, coming together and then going apart. And without the trains, you cannot have that. So we get the rise of national brands and corporations. You are not going to have the Gilded Age without the Transcontinental Railroad, which is why it's probably the most important thing to remember. So one way to think about the West is kind of like competing interests, right? Is the West gonna be for the individuals? Is it gonna be for ranchers? Is it gonna be for farmers? Is it gonna be for corporations? And one of the folks who are moving out west to make their way are miners. I think we think about miners as being these like, oh, I found gold, but it might start out like that. It starts out in California and it sort of moves west. But as soon as people find these mineral deposits, it is not these individuals that are going to take a lot of the profits from mining. It is going to be corporations. So if I really want to dig in the ground, we are going to find silver in Nevada. We kind of like start out by finding gold in California, but then we start like it's almost like a opposite migration east. And when we find things like silver in Nevada and gold in other places, it is not individuals who are going to be making the profits. It is corporations. They have to have drills, which is capital, right? It's capital intensive to dig in the earth and get all of this stuff out. They are going to have investors. They are going to have employees, mostly immigrants as well, right? That they are going to exploit. And then you're going to have these boom towns that are basically corporate, towns. And so really, although we think of the West as a place for individuals, it is these like corporations that are going to take over a lot of the mining. It is really confusing when you think about this, but like in class, I often ask, what is a rancher and how are they different than farmers, right? What ranchers do is they just let their cows kind of wander the earth, like, right? They're going to brand them and they just go out in the open field and they eat whatever grasses are there. Farmers farm. They're going to plant crops. So even if I'm like a milk farmer, like a cattle farmer, you can farm cattle, but what you need to do is like raise the hay to feed the animals, and you're going to stay in one place, and you don't need this vast amounts of land because you are planting crops. Ranchers are just let their cows wander on these vast expanses of land, eating the natural grass, and then they're going to round them up, right? And so the cows are down in Texas, they're down here, like in Texas, the big like hook 'em longhorns, right? They're eating the grass, they're all done. They're going to herd them up, and then where are they going to go? They're going to go to Texas, or up to north to these cattle towns. The role of the cowboy was really just to take the cows from Texas to the train, places like Dodge City. So these dudes would just be out, like, herding cow for a month. Then they would get to these like railheads. They would get like a big paycheck. This is why like cowboys have like in these cowboy towns have a big reputation or bad reputation for like prostitution and drinking, because they would get these paychecks and then they would like kind of go crazy. The cows would then get on the train, and we'll talk about that later, I think. And then they're going to go to get disassembled. The cows are going to get on the train and go to Chicago. Rather than having local butchers, we are going to have two monopolies that are taking over all of the like most of the meat packing in America. So you have all of the cows going to Chicago, getting disassembled, and then like shipped all throughout America. These cowboys that are taking these cows up to these trailheads are very diverse. I feel like there's like stereotypes, that used to be around, but there was a lot of, it was just basically a working class job. So the cows would go to Chicago where they would get disassembled in these like meat packing plants. The most famous is Swift and Armor. And so the cows go in, and what's going to come out is all of the meat and the products and they used every single part of the cow, right? And so then once it's on the cows, the meat is going to go to New York and all these other places. So this is like an example of an integrated market. But what is going to end the cowboy way of life is when the trains come to them, right? You don't need to herd cattle up to wherever north to St. Louis, right? When the trains are in Texas. So there's like a closing of the West that happens, not just because of the trains that are going to make it all civilized, but they're also going to enclose the West by farmers and barbed wire and these other things. And so ranching becomes an increasingly hard way of life because there's just no open range anymore. So then the other people who are on the West are homesteaders. These are the people who are going to get, I'm putting it in quotes, free land, right? So the government also gives individual families like 160 acres. They're like, here you go, it's the free land. But when you take a look at this land, right, this woman in her like little cart, this is like dried up buffalo poop or buffalo dung, buffalo chips, whatever, right? There are no trees, there is no water, there is no life. The only thing she has as a resource is poop, right? They have to make their houses out of the dirt. And if they want anything else, they have to pay for it. And who is bringing it over there? The trains. And so while this land is free, anything that you want to live that is above living in a mud hut costs money, and they need to put a massive amount of capital into the land and into their lives in order to make it happen. So railroads, who got all those vast acres of land on either side of their trains, the most valuable land is going to be close to the train. While you could get free land from the government, the railroads are going to make money selling their land because it's better. They're going to try to like control the water resources because they were the first ones there. And so the railroads are gobbling up a lot of the land, trying to make money selling it, and they're putting out all this propaganda like, come west, it's great, right? Meanwhile, farmers are struggling. So here is the thing. This free land is not free. It is rough. It is horrible. It is buffalo poop. How do we get anywhere? Is through debt, right? People are going to have to use barbed wire. If you don't enclose your farm, it's going to get eaten up. I'm going to, struggle to make some corn, and then it's going to get eaten up by some bison, right? So you're going to have to spend money on barbed wire. You're going to have to spend money on machines. You're going to have to spend money on transportation costs. You got to spend money. If I want my house to be made out of wood and not like mud, I'm going to have to pay for wood, right? All of the nails. And so all of these things are going to cost money, and farmers are going into debt. Hopefully you guys kind of saw that with like the simulation from the entrance. But the problem is that like as more and more people like invest in the land and do better, is when everyone starts to do better with farming and they actually get us some corn, you get overproduction. Overproduction was everyone makes too much stuff. Overproduction is going to cause a drop in prices. And then you're going to have monopolies that are controlling these rates. And so, people have a problem with debt. They have a problem with overproduction, which is like, lowering the price of their crops. So even when I actually do something well, I can't get a very good price for it. And then the government is going to do even worse. I'm actually going to go ahead a couple of slides. They're going to make matters worse by causing deflation. They're actually going to take money out of the system. The farmers need inflation to actually try to make some money. Their prices are going down. The definition of deflation is prices going down. So like they want prices to go up, they want inflation, but the government is actively going to deflate the economy, the money supply, which benefits rich people, right? If deflation is lower prices, but it basically makes money more valuable, but it also makes debt more valuable. People in debt, if it's deflation, I have $1 million, I feel like I have 1,000,005, right? But if I'm in debt $1 million, I feel like I'm in debt 1,000,005. This crime of 73 is what is the gold standard. And so while these farmers are suffering, the government is making it worse with their monetary policy. And why are they going to do that? Is because they are corrupt. The people who really have the power are these monopolies. There is collusion, there is corruption, and everybody knows it. So the way the farmers are going to try to combat this kind of overwhelming problems that they are facing is to organize. And the first one is called the Grange, which is basically like a union. They are essentially like, hey, what if we coordinated? What if we helped each other like borrow tools? What if we like tried to like not raise so much corn to raise the price? What if we did all of these things? So the Grange is going to try to do some political movement on its own. I do want to I really just want to say, just forget about most of this stuff, because while they have some limited successes, what we're going to find later is this gets overturned by federal Supreme Court because they are still in the hands of the pockets. So Munvey, Illinois is going to say, you know what, we can regulate the railroad, but it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to be like, you know what, railroads are people, you can't take away their rights. So they try to organize at kind of a state level. They are upset about the gold standard. And what they are going to do is create a third political party called the Populist to try to combat these issues. I think this is my favorite quote. It's actually from Mary Elizabeth Lease, and she says, "We need to raise less corn and more hell." You cannot farm your way out of this problem. People need to get political to get out of overproduction and price collapse and deflation and the debt trap. They wanted to have regulation. They wanted to have they wanted more federal involvement in the economy, because they saw this like laissez-faire economics, like hands off, no regulation, was really just hands out to the corporation and nothing for them. So they create this like third political party called the Populists to basically try to combat these conditions. All right, I hope you guys are all right. Sorry I had to miss today. And I want to go to the dentist. I'm so nervous.